The CEO gives DNA kits to his employees as part of a wellness initiative. Days later, one child from the daycare program is a genetic match. His assistant brings him the results, pale and speechless. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. Ethan Harrington was the kind of CEO who prided himself on bold gestures. He believed in innovation not just within the walls of his biotech company, but also in the way he treated his employees. That was how he had come up with the idea of gifting everyone on staff a DNA testing kit. On paper, it was a clever move, free genetic health insights for them and positive publicity for him. Ethan loved the notion of being seen as both generous and forward-thinking. His board members, initially skeptical, ended up praising the strategy for its team-building potential. Everybody would bond over discovering their ancestry or unlocking some hidden piece of their genetic puzzle. Yet what Ethan never anticipated was that a random match in that swirling data of nucleotides would knock him off balance and threaten to unravel the life he had spent decades shaping. He made the announcement of the gift at the company's 10th anniversary celebration, a lavish rooftop affair overlooking the city's skyline. The staff applauded wildly at the news. Top-of-the-line home DNA kits for everyone, plus a small bonus as a thank you for their loyal service. It was the perfect feel-good moment. Ethan personally handed out the boxes, smiling at the excited chatter around him. That night he drove home through streets bathed in neon glow, convinced he had pulled off another winning move. He could already picture the headlines painting him as a visionary who truly cared about the welfare of his workforce. It was precisely the kind of narrative he wanted for Harrington Biogen, a company that thrived on merging commerce with compassion. But 2 weeks later, as the test results trickled in, Ethan noticed a shift in the atmosphere. His executive assistant, a meticulous woman named Vanessa Carter, started getting strange messages from the testing company. Most employees were gleaning ordinary results, a hint of French ancestry here, a predisposition to lactose intolerance there. Harmless revelations, except for one. The data flagged an unexpected close familial connection between Ethan Harrington himself and a child whose sample had been submitted under an employee's account. Vanessa, tight-lipped and professional, asked Ethan to confirm that he had not done a direct paternal test with anyone. He felt a surge of confusion. He had used the kit himself, wanting to see if there were any health markers to worry about. But he certainly hadn't planned to share that data outside the prearranged privacy settings. Yet here it was, a close match. More than that, the child's sample apparently matched him as a father. Ethan dismissed his next meeting, locked himself in his office, and studied the file that Vanessa handed him. It contained the result breakdown, though names were redacted for confidentiality. Still, there was no mistaking the stated percentage of shared DNA. This was no distant cousin. It was child-level closeness, the kind that would place him at the center of a paternity storm he never saw coming. A trembling rushed through his hands as he realized the ramifications. If there was a child in his company's database, how old was that child, and who was the mother? The first thing Ethan did was call the testing company's top executive, threatening lawsuits if they divulged any details to tabloids or let the data slip outside a strictly confidential circle. He had built Harrington Biogen from nothing, sacrificing personal relationships and working brutal hours. He had ended a long-time engagement 7 years earlier, telling himself love could wait while success beckoned. The notion that he might have fathered a child without knowing it was the kind of twist that threatened his carefully constructed image. But if the data was accurate, ignoring it would be foolish. So he pressed the testing company for any fragments of information they could legally share. Days passed in a tense limbo until an encrypted email arrived on Vanessa's computer. She rushed into Ethan's office and placed a printout on his desk without a word. He scanned it once, twice, then read it a third time just to be sure. The name listed in the profile, Linda Pierce, an administrative assistant who had been with Harrington Biogen for about 6 months. She had used one of the company-sponsored kits for herself and apparently one for her son. The results indicated that Linda's boy, Oliver Pierce, was Ethan's biological child. Shock pulsed through Ethan's entire body. He tried to place Linda's face, curly brown hair, quiet demeanor, always polite in the elevator. He vaguely remembered her HR file. She was single, mid-30s, well-qualified, a bit reserved. How had she ended up with him as a father to her son? He went mentally back through the years, rummaging for any memory of a brief affair or a fleeting connection that might have led to a pregnancy. He came up blank. His personal relationships, though not many, were carefully managed. He could not recall meeting Linda outside a professional context, yet the test was certain: a father, a son. That night he barely slept. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw a young boy's face, someone who might have Ethan's nose, or the slight cleft in Ethan's chin, or the same intense stare. Possibilities plagued him. Could Linda have visited one of those late-night company parties years ago, back when Harrington Biogen was smaller? Could there have been a single night Ethan couldn't recall, maybe when an acquisition victory had led to too much champagne? The scenarios felt improbable, but the question remained: how else had Linda become pregnant with his child? The next morning, Ethan arrived at the office early, determined to confront the reality head-on. He found Linda at her desk in the administrative wing, sorting through mail. Her eyes went wide when she looked up and saw him. Without waiting for her to speak, he asked if they could talk in private. She swallowed nervously and followed him to a small conference room. Once inside, Ethan placed the test results gently on the table. "I need an explanation," he said, controlling his tone. He wasn't angry so much as staggered. Linda's face went pale. Her lips trembled as she tried to form words, but nothing emerged at first. Then tears filled her eyes. She confessed that years ago she had undergone a procedure at a fertility clinic. She had chosen an anonymous sperm donor after concluding she wanted a child, but wasn't prepared to wait for the perfect relationship. As a financially stable woman in her late 20s, she had made the choice deliberately. She had signed all the paperwork for a closed donation, no paternal contact, no complications. But the clinic had run out of the original donor samples she'd pre-selected, and because of a data mix-up, she ended up receiving a different batch. She never knew the identity of her child's biological father. She only knew it wasn't the donor profile she had originally chosen, and by then it was too late to reverse anything. When Linda applied to Harrington Biogen, she had no clue Ethan Harrington was that accidental donor. She had never seen him outside the occasional memo or newsletter portrait, and he was hardly ever in the lower floors. Life had gone on quietly for her and Oliver, until the free DNA test. She thought it would be a fun experiment for her son to see his heritage. Now all the secrets were laid bare. Ethan listened in stunned silence as Linda poured out her story. Anguish rippled in her voice when she spoke of her fear that Oliver would be taken from her or that Ethan might try to claim custody. She braced for the worst, a powerful CEO discovering an accidental fatherhood, yet Ethan felt something unexpected stirring beneath his shock: compassion. Linda had not tricked him or orchestrated a plan to tie him down. She, too, was a victim of the clinic's error, and in the midst of the confusion, there was a 9-year-old boy who had never asked for any of this. Ethan didn't know what to say at first. A part of him was furious at the clinic, furious at fate, furious at the unwelcome intrusion into his carefully ordered life. But the larger part of him felt a pull he couldn't ignore. If this child was truly his flesh and blood, even by accident, How could he walk away? The two adults stared at each other, the air thick with emotions that had no simple resolution. Linda apologized repeatedly, explaining she'd never meant to hide the truth, but it had been invisible to her as well. Ethan finally cleared his throat and asked about Oliver. Did he know? Linda shook her head vigorously, tears sliding down her cheeks. All he knows is that the test said he might have a biological relative somewhere, she said softly. He's smart, Mr. Harrington. He's curious. I wanted to wait and see if it was even real before telling him anything. For a moment, Ethan simply pressed his palms against the table, steadying himself in the face of a reality that threatened to turn his world upside down. Linda was trembling, clearly prepared for condemnation. Instead, Ethan took a deep breath and told her, "I don't blame you." He admitted he needed some time to process the shock, but he also recognized Oliver's right to know, eventually, who his father was. The question now was how they would proceed. When Linda left the conference room, Ethan felt hollow and restless. Everything in his life had been built on knowledge and control, yet here he was, blindsided by a twist that no corporate training could have taught him to handle. In his private office, he shut the door and closed his eyes, already imagining what might happen if the media found out. Or what if Oliver found out only to reject him for being absent all these years? Before going to the next part, please subscribe to our channel, like this story, and share it with your friends. Ethan spent the rest of that afternoon in his office staring out at the city skyline through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The realization that he had a 9-year-old son, someone who had grown up entirely unaware of him, felt surreal. Stray memories kept jabbing at him as though trying to highlight a possible hint from the past, but nothing concrete surfaced. This wasn't a matter of forgotten one-night stands or teenage mistakes. It was a clinic error, a bureaucratic slip that had spun 2 lives into chaos. Now he found himself silently grappling with a question he had never imagined he would face. Did he truly want to be a father? By evening, Ethan was still in a daze. He canceled 2 more meetings, a highly unusual step for him. In all his years running Harrington Biogen, he rarely postponed a business obligation. Yet his mind refused to latch onto profit margins and research schedules. He couldn't focus on anything but the image of a boy named Oliver who liked to read, as Linda had nervously mentioned. A boy who might have Ethan's stubborn streak or the same fascination with how things worked. It was as if a door had been thrown open in Ethan's life, offering a glimpse of a path he'd always told himself could wait until later, if it ever happened at all. Vanessa, who typically hovered in the background to ensure Ethan's days ran smoothly, noticed the shift in his mood. She poked her head in right around dinner time, suggesting he head home and get some rest. Ethan nodded absently. He felt exhausted, and not just from overwork. He was drained by the sheer emotional weight of deciding what to do next. Part of him wanted to bury the discovery, pay Linda a generous sum to keep things quiet, so he could carry on with his pristine public image. But that was only a passing thought, a reflex of self-preservation. Something else, something stronger, made him recoil from the idea of shutting out a child who was, in every sense, his flesh and blood. Late that night, lying wide awake in his penthouse bedroom, he recalled his own upbringing. His parents had been supportive but distant. They traveled often, leaving him with a string of nannies throughout his childhood. He remembered how lonely it felt to eat dinner at a long table with only hired staff for company. He remembered trying, as a boy, to show them his school projects only to be told they'd look later. Later, of course, rarely arrived. Over time, he learned to rely on no one but himself. He swore, when he was old enough to reflect on family, that if he ever became a father, he would not follow that pattern. But that promise had once felt theoretical, a vow made in the abstract. Until now, fatherhood had been something he could choose to accept or reject. Suddenly, it was no longer a hypothetical scenario. The next morning, Ethan requested that Linda come to his office after she settled in. He spent a restless hour pacing back and forth, rehearsing different ways to say that he wanted to know Oliver. When Linda arrived, eyes down, posture guarded, he gestured for her to take a seat on the leather chair across from his desk. She gripped her hands in her lap, and he noticed how worn she looked, as though she hadn't slept much either. "I'd like to meet him," Ethan said gently, cutting right to the heart of the matter, "if you'll allow it." His voice felt strange to his own ears, uncharacteristically vulnerable. Linda blinked, then let out a shaky breath. "I was so afraid you'd try to force me out or do something drastic," she admitted, tears edging at the corners of her eyes. "I never wanted to stand in your way, but it's all happened so fast. I'm worried about Oliver." Ethan leaned forward, hands pressed flat against his desk. "I understand," he said quietly, "and I can't claim to know what's best. But I think Oliver has a right to the truth. I'm not planning a big announcement. He paused, voice faltering. "I don't want him growing up not knowing who his father is if there's any chance he might want a relationship." Linda lifted her gaze, relief mingling with apprehension. "He asks questions sometimes," she confessed. "He's seen other kids talking about their dads. I tried to explain that some families are just different. He's so smart, though, and I can't help feeling he senses there's more to the story." Ethan felt a pang. Imagining Oliver's unspoken questions stung in a way he hadn't expected. "Maybe we take it one step at a time. We can meet in a neutral place, a park, a kid-friendly cafe, somewhere he can feel safe. And we won't tell him everything right away if that seems overwhelming." Linda pressed her lips together. "He's only 9, she said softly, "but he's got an old soul, if that makes sense. He notices more than most kids his age. I'll talk to him first. Explain that I found out there's someone who might be important in his life. I'll see how he responds. Then, if he's open to it, we'll arrange a meeting." Anxiety rippled through Ethan, but it was tempered by cautious hope. "Thank you," he said, and the words held more weight than any business negotiation. "I appreciate you trusting me." Linda offered a tentative nod. "It's not trust so much as a sense that we can't run from this. Oliver deserves the full picture." Ethan found himself reaching for a pad of paper, as though scribbling notes could help him handle the surge of emotion. "Whenever you're both ready, just let me know," he managed. "In the meantime, I'll respect your space. No corporate statements, no news. This is private." After Linda left, Ethan tried to concentrate on the day's tasks: a strategy session with the R&D team, a budget review for the next quarter. Yet his thoughts kept drifting to Oliver. What did the boy like to do for fun? What made him laugh? Would Oliver resent a father who'd been invisible for 9 years? That afternoon, Ethan's phone buzzed with a text from Linda. "I told him there's someone he might want to meet. He's curious. Could we do Saturday morning at Rosaline Park, 10 a.m.? Ethan typed back before he could overthink. "Yes, absolutely. Thank you." He stared at his screen, heart pounding, marveling at how it took only a handful of words to change the trajectory of his weekend, and possibly his entire life. Saturday arrived, crisp and sunny, with a hint of autumn in the breeze. Ethan showed up 15 minutes early, pacing near the park's entrance. He wore casual slacks and a sweater, in an attempt to look less intimidating than the usual tailored suits. A handful of children ran past, shrieking with laughter. He felt a tug inside his chest, somewhere between excitement and terror. He was about to meet his son. Finally, he spotted Linda's curly hair bobbing up and down as she walked along the sidewalk, a young boy trailing beside her. Oliver had sandy brown hair and a slight build, but even from a distance, Ethan thought he could make out a hint of his own jawline in the boy's profile. A wave of unreality washed over him. Is this really happening? The two approached, Linda offering a small, reassuring smile. "Oliver," she said gently, nudging her son forward. "This is Mr. Harrington. He's the friend I told you about. The one who might be part of our family's story." Oliver looked up, gazing at Ethan with unabashed curiosity. The boy had alert hazel eyes that flicked over Ethan's face as if searching for familiarity. "Hello," Oliver said politely. Then he seemed to reconsider, adding a more tentative, hi. Ethan crouched a bit to be at eye level. "Hey, Oliver," he greeted, forcing a calm into his voice that he certainly did not feel. "It's nice to meet you." Oliver studied him for a moment. "Mom says you work at a big science company," he said, eyeing Ethan's broad shoulders as though expecting an entire lab coat to appear. "She said you're really important." The corner of Ethan's mouth twitched. "Well," he replied, "it's a decent-sized place, I guess. We research cures and tests that help people stay healthy. What do you like in school?" Oliver shrugged. "I like reading, especially books about space, and I like building stuff." Linda gave Ethan a small, hopeful smile. "He's pretty good with those science kits that let kids assemble circuits and little robot parts," she offered. Ethan brightened, relieved to have a path of conversation. "You know," he said, turning back to Oliver, "we have a STEM outreach program for kids at my company. Maybe one day you can come by and see how some of our labs work. We build all kinds of prototypes for biotech experiments." Then he paused, unsure if he was saying too much too fast. Oliver's eyes flickered with interest, though he managed to keep his voice neutral. "Cool," he said. Then he glanced at Linda, as if silently asking permission to be excited. She nodded in encouragement. "Why don't we walk around a bit?" she suggested, leading them farther into the park, past a line of tall oak trees. The late morning sun cut golden shapes on the grass, and Oliver pointed out squirrels darting between branches. Ethan followed, noticing how the boy's gait moved quickly, like he was always brimming with questions. They ended up by the duck pond. Linda gently coaxed Oliver to talk about his favorite books, giving Ethan small glimpses into the boy's personality. Oliver had a quiet determination. He wasn't shy exactly, but he seemed used to operating on his own wavelength, diving deep into projects that held his interest. Ethan recognized something of himself in that intense focus. It felt surreal to see tiny pieces of his own traits manifested in a child he had only just met. At some point, they sat on a bench. Linda placed a hand on Oliver's shoulder, cautioning him about leaning too far forward over the pond's edge. She then caught Ethan's eye. He could tell she was studying him, gauging how well he was handling the scenario. Honestly, he felt both exhilarated and overwhelmed. Every time Oliver spoke, Ethan paid rapt attention, worried he might miss a clue about how to proceed. After about an hour, Linda said gently, "How about we grab a quick bite at the cafe near the park entrance?" She gave Oliver a look that clearly implied they'd done enough for a first meeting. Oliver nodded, which Ethan took as a sign of cautious approval. They wandered to the small cafe, found an outside table, and ordered sandwiches and juice. During their quiet meal, Oliver asked Ethan if he always knew he wanted to run a company. "I kind of fell into it," Ethan admitted, careful not to make the conversation too heavy. "But I've always liked figuring out how things work. I started with a small lab, had a few breakthroughs, and before I knew it, I had to learn how to manage a big organization." Oliver sipped his juice, nodding thoughtfully. "Sometimes I think I might build rockets or robots when I grow up," he said. "Or maybe I'll make medicines or something cool like that." It was the simplest statement, but it carried a potent hope. Ethan's heart clenched as he pictured guiding Oliver through the complexities of science, giving him the opportunities Ethan had missed as a lonely child. It almost felt like a second chance to do right by someone, even if that chance had arrived in the most unpredictable manner possible. When the meeting concluded, Linda suggested they say goodbye, as Oliver had a friend's birthday party in the afternoon. Ethan felt a pang at the idea of parting ways so quickly, but he reminded himself that he couldn't rush a bond that had no foundation yet. He knelt again, meeting Oliver's eyes. "Thanks for letting me hang out with you," he said softly. "If it's okay with your mom, maybe we can do this again soon." Oliver bit his lip, then gave a small nod. "I think that would be nice," he said, still subdued, but no longer quite as guarded. Then he turned to follow Linda, who mouthed a silent thank you to Ethan before guiding Oliver away. Watching them go, Ethan felt a tumult of emotions. Relief that the introduction hadn't been disastrous. Longing to spend more time with his son. Fear that he might fail him the way Ethan's own parents had failed. Yet amidst all of that, a tiny, fragile bud of optimism bloomed in his chest. In the gentle sway of tree branches overhead, he found himself daring to imagine a future that included Oliver at its center. Before going to the next part, please subscribe to our channel, like this story, and share it with friends. Ethan left Roslyn Park with a swirl of conflicting emotions surging through him. He felt relief that the first meeting with Oliver hadn't been a catastrophe, but that feeling was buried beneath an avalanche of questions about where to go from here. For the rest of the day, he couldn't concentrate on anything beyond replaying Oliver's bright, inquisitive expressions and the way he carefully measured his responses, as though still deciding whether to trust this stranger who called himself a friend. Ethan had told Linda he would wait to hear from them before planning anything else, but the desire to see his son again, this time without the same edge of panic, was already growing inside him. That evening, he shut himself in his penthouse office and stared at a photograph of the skyline, realizing it might soon be replaced by framed drawings or pictures of a child who had been a complete unknown just weeks before. He tried to call his mother, Patricia Harrington, though he knew she would have limited sympathy for personal dilemmas. Throughout Ethan's childhood, Patricia had been absent more often than not, focused on her own social aspirations. Still, she remained his only close family member, and if he was going to welcome Oliver into his life, it felt right to at least inform her. When she answered, the conversation proved as chilly as he'd expected. The minute he mentioned the boy, Patricia's clipped tone grew tighter. She asked how such a thing could have happened without his knowledge, and Ethan explained the mishap at the clinic, the unexpected discovery through DNA tests. Patricia fell silent for several seconds, then told him, "If you choose to be part of that child's life, be certain you've calculated the potential backlash. This could harm the company's image." With those words, she exited the call, leaving Ethan with the hollow realization that family to her had always taken a back seat to public relations. Unsettled, he decided to bury himself in the minutiae of work. He spent hours preparing for a meeting with a new research partner, going over legal documents that detailed budgets, timelines, and patent agreements, but none of it resonated with the urgency he felt about the changes in his personal sphere. Meanwhile, Linda sent a polite text thanking him for treating Oliver respectfully, suggesting they give the boy time to process before planning another meeting. That sounded sensible, but it also left Ethan feeling helpless. Rationally, he knew Oliver would need space to absorb the situation. Emotionally, all he wanted was to reach out every day, hoping to form a bond stronger than a handshake in a park. Midweek came, and Ethan was in the midst of an executive committee briefing when his phone vibrated. A small thrill shot through him when he saw Linda's name on the screen. She wrote that Oliver had been talking about their encounter in the park, mostly in curious, speculative ways, and he'd asked if Ethan really worked with cool science stuff. Linda hinted that maybe sometime soon it would help Oliver to see where Ethan spent his time. Ethan glanced around the glass-walled conference room, looking at the line of stoic senior executives who were waiting for his input. Could he envision Oliver walking these halls, peering through lab windows, possibly meeting some of the scientists? The idea made him smile inwardly. Once the meeting concluded, he stepped away from the group to reply, telling Linda that he'd be honored to give Oliver a tour whenever it felt right. That weekend, Linda and Oliver arrived at Harrington Biogen on a quiet Saturday afternoon. Ethan personally cleared the labs of all but essential staff so the tour wouldn't be chaotic. Oliver followed him through the ground floor reception, eyes wide at the holographic displays highlighting the company's breakthroughs in diagnostics and gene therapy. The boy asked a flurry of questions about how cells got modified to fight diseases, and Ethan was amazed by his willingness to dive into scientific detail. Linda hovered at a polite distance, letting them interact, though Ethan caught her anxious glances. She looked wary, but also determined to give them space to connect. They rode an elevator to the 6th floor research wing, where Ethan introduced Oliver to Dr. Miranda Wong, one of the lead researchers developing a revolutionary test for early-stage cancers. Oliver peppered her with questions: what made cells turn dangerous, how DNA got damaged, and how the lab designed special proteins to detect mutations. Dr. Wong, a patient educator at heart, explained in kid-friendly terms, occasionally offering small analogies about cell repair squads trying to fix broken bits. Oliver nodded attentively, as though storing it all away for later. At one point he turned to Ethan, beaming with excitement. "Is this what you do every day?" he asked, in a tone that suggested he might be discovering a new superhero realm. Ethan, fighting a surge of emotion, simply told him yes, they worked on big problems to help people. On the way upstairs to the demonstration area, where prototypes of portable testing devices were displayed, Oliver paused. He gazed through a glass pane into a restricted lab that housed sensitive equipment. "It's so big," he murmured. Linda rested a hand on his shoulder, but Ethan stepped beside him, pointing out the main features inside. "We're trying to make tests more accurate so doctors catch diseases sooner," he explained. "Every day we're learning something new about how the human body works. It never stops being fascinating." Oliver flashed him a small, serious smile, and Ethan felt a swell of pride. The child's curiosity was boundless, and he couldn't help picturing a future where he guided Oliver's studies, encouraging that spark of scientific wonder. Eventually they wrapped up the tour, ending in a spacious lounge with a panoramic window overlooking the city. Linda turned to Ethan, offering quiet thanks. "He's been so eager to see what you do," she said gently. Oliver stood at the glass, eyes roaming the skyline. Ethan cleared his throat, deciding to test the waters. "We can grab a bite in the cafeteria," he suggested. "They have kid-friendly stuff on weekends, burgers, fries, milkshakes." That last word got Oliver's attention. He spun around, looking to Linda for permission. She gave him a nod. "A quick lunch," she agreed, her lips forming a slight smile. They made their way to the cafeteria, a minimalist space that rarely saw families, but did have a small menu designed for visitors during open house events. Oliver dug into a burger and fries, occasionally chatting about the labs while Ethan tried not to seem overly eager. Linda ate quietly, her posture relaxed for the first time, as though reassured by how easily Oliver had taken to this new environment. "He's going to have 1,000 new questions later," she said softly. Ethan smiled, aware that just weeks ago, he couldn't have imagined this scene at all. Himself, seated at a cafeteria table with a boy who was, undeniably, part of him. During the meal, Oliver looked up and asked, "Mom said you're really busy. Do you ever just do nothing and have fun?" The question caught Ethan off guard, and he almost laughed at how direct it was. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but I'll be honest, I spend a lot of time working. Maybe I need to learn a better balance." Oliver tilted his head as if weighing that answer and then shrugged. "Okay, I like reading about science, but sometimes I also just draw or watch funny videos." Ethan nodded. "I'd love to see what you draw, and if you find interesting videos, You can share them with me. I can use all the inspiration I can get. After lunch, they lingered by the elevator bank. Oliver tapped his foot, seeming to debate whether to say something. Finally, he asked, "Can we do this again, maybe?" He looked from Ethan to Linda. Without hesitation, Ethan answered, "Absolutely." Linda placed a gentle hand on Oliver's shoulder. "We can make time," she said quietly, glancing at Ethan with what might have been gratitude or lingering uncertainty. Nonetheless, the air between them felt calmer. A tentative understanding had emerged. They were all navigating unfamiliar territory, but they were willing to keep going. When they left, Ethan escorted them to the lobby. He almost offered to drive them home, then thought better of it. Rushing things could backfire. Instead, he gave Oliver a short wave. The boy waved back before stepping through the glass doors onto the bustling sidewalk. Ethan watched until they were gone, feeling a pang when the door closed. He had never expected fatherhood, but now he couldn't imagine retracting it from the path he was on. A few days later, Ethan received a message from Linda proposing another outing, something less formal than a lab tour. Perhaps they could meet at an aquarium or science museum. Oliver had apparently been excited by the possibility of exploring more about biology. Ethan, eager for the chance, readily agreed. He found himself fantasizing about all the different activities they could do, maybe building model rockets or attending a planetarium show. Each idea sparked anticipation that felt foreign to him. His life used to be an endless series of deadlines, negotiations, and business trips. Now there was this entirely new dimension of fatherhood that made him reconsider his priorities in a way he never had before. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, Patricia Harrington had begun leaving pointed voicemail messages, warning that the press might discover Ethan's parental status. She reminded him that any misstep could reduce investors' confidence in Harrington Biogen. Ethan ignored most of these calls. He no longer cared about the gossip swirling in upper social circles. All he cared about was forging an authentic connection with Oliver. Let the world speculate. In his mind, the child was more important than the threat of fleeting headlines. By the end of that week, Ethan and Linda had agreed that Oliver would love the city aquarium, with its towering tanks of sea life and interactive exhibits. They set a date for Saturday morning. Ethan secretly bought a guidebook about marine creatures, brushing up so he could answer any questions Oliver might have. The realization that he was studying for an outing with his son made him laugh. This was so far outside his comfort zone, yet it felt right. Come Saturday, Ethan arrived at the aquarium, feeling a blend of excitement and nerves. Oliver bounced on the balls of his feet, wearing a small backpack decorated with planet stickers. He gave Ethan a grin that made Ethan's heart swell. Together, they wandered through neon-lit corridors, marveling at octopuses, sharks, and colorful reef fish. At the touch pool, Oliver giggled when a horseshoe crab brushed against his fingertips, and Ethan couldn't help but grin too, as if he had rediscovered the joy of small wonders. Linda stayed in the background, snapping a few discreet photos of father and son standing side by side, silhouettes outlined against a giant glass panel filled with darting fish. When they finally emerged into the gift shop, Oliver was clutching a plastic toy submarine and a book on deep-sea creatures. Ethan insisted on buying them, despite Linda's mild protests. It felt good to provide for the boy in some small way, to see that spark of gratitude in Oliver's eyes. Outside, the sun shone brightly, and the three of them walked along the waterfront for a while, discussing the oddest animals they'd seen. Oliver launched into an excited account of how jellyfish didn't have bones or brains, which enthralled him. Linda gave Ethan a sidelong glance that said, "He's never this chatty unless he's really comfortable." He felt an inner glow, realizing each step they took together built a bridge over 9 years of not knowing. Before going to the next part, please subscribe to our channel, like this story, and share it with friends. Ethan woke up on Sunday morning with a sense of anticipation that had become strangely familiar. For the past few weeks, ever since he'd learned about Oliver, his weekends had taken on a new shape. Instead of golf outings with business partners or solitary hours spent catching up on work, he now found himself planning activities that might appeal to a curious 9-year-old boy. He scrolled through his phone, half expecting a message from Linda about what Oliver had thought of the aquarium. When none came, he told himself not to worry. After all, it had only been a day since that trip. They deserved some breathing room. Still, his mind flitted back to the moment when Oliver had pressed his nose against the giant glass tank, mesmerized by a school of silver fish flickering through the water. Ethan realized he was recalling every tiny detail: the subdued lighting, the childlike wonder in Oliver's hazel eyes, and Linda's silent watchfulness. In each memory, he felt a tug on something deep within him that he hadn't known existed. In a matter of weeks, fatherhood had begun to open corridors of his heart that had remained locked for years. Late in the morning, Patricia Harrington called again, this time leaving a voicemail. She cautioned him against any public mention of Oliver, reiterating that the board of Harrington Biogen wouldn't appreciate distractions. Ethan listened to her clipped tone and found himself oddly unmoved. He no longer felt an urge to defend his choices or justify why he was letting a 9-year-old boy take priority over corporate concerns. He knew the board members well enough to guess that they cared less about the child himself and more about damage control. Yet the idea of stepping back from Oliver just to maintain a spotless image made Ethan's stomach churn. He pressed delete on the voicemail without responding. He spent the rest of Sunday reviewing a major product launch scheduled for next quarter, trying to ensure everything was in place. But every so often, he'd glance at the photograph he now kept on his desk, a snapshot Linda had shared from the aquarium. In it, Oliver stood in front of a coral reef display, smiling so wide that Ethan couldn't help smiling back each time he saw it. The boy's excitement practically leapt off the screen. For someone who had been isolated by an error in a fertility clinic, he had displayed remarkable bravery in stepping into a relationship with a man he barely knew. On Monday, Ethan had back-to-back meetings, concluding with an important negotiation with a pharmaceutical partner. By the time he emerged from the conference room, the sun was dipping below the horizon. Checking his phone, he noticed a text from Linda that brightened his entire mood. Oliver keeps talking about the aquarium. He's amazed by the jellyfish. Thank you for making his day so special. He asked if you might have time this weekend for something else, maybe a library visit or a science store. Let me know your schedule. Ethan felt a surge of warmth at the notion that Oliver had enjoyed himself enough to want more time together. Before he could overthink, he tapped out a reply, suggesting they visit a nearby science museum that specialized in kid-friendly hands-on exhibits. He had always been too busy for places like that, but now he looked forward to it with a zeal that overshadowed any boardroom victory. Linda responded within an hour, confirming that Saturday morning again worked best, provided Oliver finished a school project by Friday. Ethan volunteered to help if Oliver needed it. He spent part of the evening smiling at the idea of sitting down with the boy, explaining concepts, maybe brainstorming for a science fair. It felt surprisingly natural to imagine tasks he used to consider purely domestic and far from his executive realm. The week passed in a flurry of routine tasks and the occasional check-in with Linda. They agreed that they'd meet at the front entrance of the Science Museum at 10 sharp. Linda mentioned that Oliver had been looking forward to it so much that he'd finished his project early. He keeps telling me how cool it is that you actually make science your job, she wrote, and Ethan laughed a little at the message. He could picture Oliver's earnest face, marveling at the adult world he was just beginning to explore. Saturday came, breezy and sunny, perfect for a day spent indoors and out. The Science Museum was housed in a sprawling building just off a busy boulevard, featuring a towering kinetic sculpture in the lobby. Ethan arrived first, pacing near the ticket counter. When Linda and Oliver showed up, the boy broke into a small grin on seeing Ethan. He wore sneakers with bright green laces and a baseball cap that nearly covered his eyes. Linda looked more relaxed than usual, as though each successful outing eased her fears. They started with an exhibit on the physics of flight, where Oliver gleefully tested paper airplanes in a wind tunnel. He took Ethan's advice on how to fold the wings, then watched with glowing satisfaction as his design caught the current just right. From there, they headed to a station demonstrating simple chemical reactions, color-changing liquids and foaming eruptions that made Oliver gasp in awe. Throughout it all, Ethan was right there beside him, explaining bits of scientific theory and grinning each time Oliver's eyes lit up with understanding. Linda occasionally stepped back, snapping pictures or letting them talk uninterrupted. At one point, Oliver peered up at Ethan and asked, "Are there labs at your company that look like this, with all these weird experiments?" Ethan chuckled, acknowledging that while some of the advanced research was more complex, the basic principles were very similar. He found himself brimming with pride, not just in the science that shaped his career, but in seeing Oliver connect with it so naturally. They stopped for a break near a robotics display. Oliver fiddled with a small interactive robot that moved plastic blocks to form words on a grid. Linda leaned against a wall, beckoning Ethan closer. She spoke quietly so Oliver wouldn't overhear. "This is the happiest I've seen him in a long time," she said, her voice betraying a mixture of gratitude and something more complicated. "He's always been interested in science, but you've sparked something bigger." Ethan paused, taking in the weight of her words. "I'm just glad he's having fun," he answered. But inside he felt a pang of responsibility and joy. If he could cultivate that passion in Oliver, maybe he could make up some of the lost years by offering the child a kind of support Ethan had never had. Linda's eyes gleamed with an emotion he recognized, concern, but also relief. She gave him a hesitant smile and looked away. Soon enough, Oliver returned with a squeal of triumph, announcing that the robot had managed to push the blocks into spelling science. Ethan gave him a playful high five, marveling at how quickly a sense of ease had developed between them. After exploring a few more exhibits, they ventured outside to a small courtyard with picnic tables and food stands. They found an empty spot, settled down with sandwiches and cold drinks, and let the midday sun warm them. Oliver munched his sandwich while Ethan asked if he had any favorite books recently. "I like the ones that have real facts," Oliver answered between bites, "but also a story so it's not just a bunch of boring words. Mom got me a book about the planets that has a funny storyline." Ethan nodded, remembering his own childhood attempts to find interesting books in a house that mostly stored legal documents and stock forecasts. "I might have a few recommendations," he said, "or we could check out a bookstore sometime. You could show me what you like." Linda smiled behind her cup of iced tea. Oliver beamed, the idea clearly appealing to him. They lingered in the courtyard for close to an hour, chatting about everyday things. Oliver's teacher, who apparently had a talent for making math fun, Ethan's schedule, which he admitted got hectic on weekdays, Linda's attempts to balance her job at Harrington Biogen with taking care of Oliver. It was the kind of normal, unremarkable conversation that most families had routinely, but for them, every moment felt significant. In a life so shaped by high-stakes corporate decisions and complicated secrets, Ethan found a simple joy in these casual exchanges. Eventually, they decided to make one final pass through the museum, where Oliver tried a virtual reality headset that simulated traveling through the human bloodstream. As they stood watching Oliver twist and turn, reacting to the VR illusions, Ethan caught Linda glancing his way again. She looked as though she might say something, but the moment passed when Oliver removed the headset and asked a question about red blood cells. On their way out, Linda touched Ethan's arm lightly, whispering, "Thank you for making the time. He won't forget days like this." Ethan managed a soft smile. "Neither will I," he said honestly. Once outside, they parted ways in front of the building. He thought about offering them a ride, but Linda gently shook her head. "We're just a few subway stops away," she said. "It's easier this way." Oliver gave Ethan a wave, and Ethan reached out to give the boy a quick, light fist bump. A flutter of emotion hit him when Oliver returned the gesture, wide-eyed and smiling. Then, in a swirl of weekend pedestrians, mother and son disappeared into the crowd. Monday dawned without drama. Ethan got to the office early, feeling more energized than he had in ages. As he passed Linda's desk, he saw she was on the phone, probably handling administrative tasks. She nodded politely to him, though a small smile flickered across her face. He returned it, aware that beneath their professional facades, something more important had taken root. A quiet mutual goal of giving Oliver as many good memories as possible. In a world that often valued profit over people, they were forging a path that set the child's well-being first. Later that afternoon, Ethan received a text from an unknown number. The message read, "I need to speak with you about your personal matters, Mr. Harrington. Call me immediately." His pulse spiked. He thought of Patricia, or worse, someone on the board. He dialed the number, his heart pounding, bracing for some sort of confrontation. A crisp voice answered, identifying himself as Richard Grant, a tabloid reporter known for sniffing out corporate scandals. Ethan's mouth went dry. Grant wasted no time, saying he had information suggesting Ethan had a secret child. He proposed writing an exposé unless Ethan agreed to an exclusive interview explaining everything. Ethan's hand tightened around the phone, anger and panic coiling together. His first instinct was to deny and threaten legal action, but a cold dread took hold. If a tabloid had already uncovered Oliver's existence, what would that do to Linda and her son? Ethan felt a protective urge surge up, stronger than any fear for his own reputation. He lowered his voice and told Grant that he had no comment. Then he ended the call, breathing hard. The world he'd tried to keep at bay was closing in, and now he had to figure out a way to safeguard Oliver from the harsh glare of media scrutiny. Before going to the next part, please subscribe to our channel, like this story, and share it with friends. Ethan ended the call with the tabloid reporter feeling as though an invisible net had just dropped around him. His hand shook slightly when he set down his phone, and he drew in a sharp breath, forcing himself to think logically. Grant claimed to know about Oliver, or at least suspected the existence of a secret child. The question was how much he actually knew. For the next several minutes, Ethan stood in his office, staring at the phone as though it might ring again with more ominous demands. A fierce protectiveness rose within him, overshadowing any concern for personal image. Whatever it took, he would shield Oliver from the ugliness of tabloid gossip. But he couldn't ignore the reality that the information was out there, swirling in rumor form, ready to explode into scandal at the slightest push. He tried to refocus on his work, but each time he glanced at the stack of documents on his desk, his mind veered back to Oliver. He pictured the boy's bright enthusiasm as they roamed the science museum together, how intently he'd listened to explanations of robotics and biology. The idea that reporters might hound Oliver or question Linda made Ethan's stomach twist with dread. He understood how tabloids operated. They thrived on half-truths and sensational headlines, often crushing innocent bystanders in the process. Even if Grant's story lacked all the details, he might still spin enough speculation to cause harm. Ethan needed a plan, a way to stay ahead of the scandal before it erupted in full force. That evening he called Linda from home. His penthouse felt cavernous and cold, every polished surface reflecting the tension he carried. When she picked up, Her voice held its usual gentle caution. Ethan hesitated, reluctant to drop this burden on her, but she had to know. Softly, he explained that a tabloid had come sniffing around, claiming knowledge of a hidden child. He didn't name Oliver outright, but it was clear who the reporter meant. Linda's sharp intake of breath told him her fears spiked too. She asked in a trembling voice if this meant they should stop meeting. Ethan swore under his breath, feeling trapped between her concern and his own desire not to lose any progress he'd made with Oliver. "I don't want to step back," he said firmly. "But I also don't want you or Oliver caught off guard. If a reporter approaches you, you can tell them nothing. I'll handle the fallout." Linda stayed quiet for a moment, then asked a question that cut straight to Ethan's heart. "What if this hurts Oliver? He's just starting to open up to you." The raw vulnerability in her voice shook him. He wished he could say that everything would be fine, but he couldn't. Still, he tried to comfort her with measured words, promising that his legal team would be prepared if any unscrupulous journalist harassed them. Before hanging up, Linda admitted that Oliver would be heartbroken if Ethan suddenly vanished, so maybe they should proceed as before, carefully, but without panic. Meanwhile, Patricia Harrington had been leaving messages warning Ethan that rumors were emerging. His own mother echoed the reporter's threats, though with a prim, detached tone. She recommended a quiet settlement or some strategic denial to preserve Harrington Biogen's brand. Ethan ignored her suggestions. He refused to treat Oliver like a mistake to be smoothed over. Instead, he quietly reached out to a crisis management consultant he'd used once before for a corporate scandal. This time, though, the scandal wasn't about misappropriated funds or faulty research. It was about a 9-year-old boy. Vanessa, his assistant, picked up on the tension rippling through the office. One morning, she stepped into Ethan's office with a concerned look and closed the door. "I've worked with you for years," she said softly, "and I've never seen you so rattled. Can I help?" He respected her discretion, so he gave her a brief overview without mentioning Oliver by name. He explained that a personal matter was at risk of being exploited by the press. She nodded slowly, eyes reflecting genuine compassion. "I can reroute calls, push certain inquiries aside, do anything to keep them off your trail," she offered. Ethan thanked her, aware that staff loyalty could be a powerful shield. If rumors were swirling, at least his inner circle might help him control who got close. While Ethan weighed his strategy, he refused to let fear isolate Oliver again. Over the next week, he continued to text Linda, ensuring she and Oliver were doing all right. Linda said that Oliver was finishing a major project at school and was excited about the possibility of visiting Harrington Biogen again. That knowledge spurred Ethan to keep forging ahead. If the tabloid published something, he would deal with it then. For now, he preferred to nurture the fragile connection that had formed between himself and the boy. 2 days later, Ethan received a call from his legal counsel, a sharp-witted attorney named Morgan Black. She informed him that the reporter Grant had been reaching out to old clinic employees, presumably searching for concrete proof of Ethan's paternity. Morgan predicted that Grant would try to ambush them with half-verified data to force a reaction. "We can file a cease and desist if he crosses certain lines," she explained, "but I need to know if you plan to publicly acknowledge the child if it comes to that." Ethan felt a knot tighten in his chest. Public acknowledgement meant letting the entire world know about Oliver. It meant answering invasive questions about Linda, the clinic error, and Oliver's future. "If it spares him from harassment, I will," Ethan said after a pause. "But I'd rather not make a spectacle." When Ethan stepped out for lunch that afternoon, the hush of the elevator seemed louder than usual. As he crossed the lobby, he noticed a figure lingering by the entrance. A gaunt man in a wrinkled jacket glanced at him, then approached with a grin that felt predatory. "Mr. Harrington, care to comment on the rumors about your secret family?" Ethan instantly recognized him as a paparazzo. Rather than reply, he brushed past the man and kept walking, ignoring the trail of accusatory questions about hidden heirs and hush money. Outside, the streetlights were off, but the midday sunlight felt just as exposing. Ethan headed to a nearby restaurant, shaking off the rancid feeling of intrusion that clung to him. He left the office early that day, slipping out a side entrance to avoid any more run-ins. On the drive home, he caught himself wondering if he should phone Linda immediately to warn her that the press might appear at her apartment. Then he decided it was better to wait until he had concrete updates from Morgan. No need to stoke panic. Still, tension thrummed through his veins. He recalled Oliver's face as the boy had asked questions about marine life. That open curiosity so different from the suspicious stares of journalists. He had to protect that innocence somehow. At midnight, after a fruitless attempt at sleep, Ethan flicked on a lamp and began drafting a letter to Oliver. It felt strange to write a 9-year-old a letter, but he needed some outlet for the swirl of emotions he couldn't voice in person just yet. He didn't plan on sending it unless circumstances forced him to vanish from Oliver's day-to-day life. In the letter, Ethan explained that he'd discovered Oliver through a DNA test, and that every time they met, Ethan saw glimpses of a future he wanted to share. He wrote about how proud he was of Oliver's intelligence, how each question the boy asked lit up the possibilities in Ethan's own mind. He closed by promising that if he ever stepped away, it wouldn't be out of choice, but out of a need to keep Oliver safe. By the time Ethan finished, the clock read almost 2 a.m., and he felt heavy with fatigue and sorrow. He hoped it would never come to delivering that letter. Morning dawned bleak and gray, matching Ethan's mood as he prepared to face the day. He was halfway through a tense phone conference when a frantic text from Linda popped up on his screen. A reporter approached me outside my building, asked about my son's father. Oliver was with me. I said no comment and rushed inside. Now Oliver's scared. Please advise. Ethan inhaled sharply, anger and worry colliding in a hot rush. He ended the call abruptly, ignoring the bewildered voices on the conference line. Protecting Oliver took precedence over any business negotiation. He dialed Linda's number. She answered in a shaky tone, describing how a pushy woman with a notepad had cornered them on the sidewalk. Linda had ushered Oliver away quickly, but the boy had overheard enough to realize the questions were about him. Ethan clenched his jaw, battling his rage at these unscrupulous intruders. "I'll send a security detail," he said, thinking rapidly. "They can keep watch near your apartment, escort you if needed." Linda thanked him, relief in her voice. "I just don't want Oliver living in fear," she whispered, sounding on the verge of tears. As soon as he hung up, Ethan contacted the head of corporate security, instructing them to assign a discreet team to Linda and Oliver's building. The cost would be high and it might draw attention, but the alternative, leaving them vulnerable, was unacceptable. Next, he called Morgan. She advised him to prepare for a public statement if matters escalated. "Pretending it's not happening won't make them go away," she pointed out. "Sometimes a carefully crafted response can reduce the frenzy." Ethan grunted in reluctant agreement. He'd always valued his privacy, but now the tabloids were forcing his hand. For Oliver's sake, he might have to craft an acknowledgement sooner rather than later. At day's end, Ethan stood in his office, gazing out the window as the city's lights flickered on like tiny beacons across the darkness. He realized he'd never felt more powerless. In business, he controlled variables through strategy and capital, but in this personal battlefield, every step forward risked exposing Oliver to greater scrutiny. He wondered how Linda was coping, whether Oliver had asked about the identity of the reporter. A wave of guilt surged through him. Oliver had only just begun trusting him, and already his presence was causing trouble. Through the swirling worry, one conviction remained steady. Ethan would not back down. If that meant briefing the board, letting the world know about Oliver, and braving the storm of public curiosity, then so be it. He would do whatever it took to hold on to the fragile beginnings of fatherhood he had stumbled into. As he left the office that night, the echo of the paparazzo's voice still rang in his ears, a reminder of the tabloids' relentless pursuit. Yet the memory of Oliver, wide-eyed and smiling at a row of jellyfish, tugged him forward with a resolve that overshadowed his fears. Before going to the next part, please subscribe to our channel, like this story, and share it with friends. The newsroom leak became public on a Wednesday morning when a low-tier gossip site posted a provocative headline, "CEO's DNA surprise, secret child discovered." Though the piece lacked specifics, it hinted at a corporate giant struggling to hide an heir produced through questionable means. By lunchtime, a few more outlets had run variations of the same rumor, none mentioning names outright but referencing an innovative biotech executive. Ethan's phone lit up with calls from reporters and acquaintances, but he declined to comment, ignoring the constant vibration in his pocket. The fear that Oliver might catch wind of these stories gnawed at him. He wondered whether Linda had already seen the headlines, whether Oliver had overheard classmates whispering. By the time the executive board convened that afternoon, tensions in the building felt palpable, as though an invisible thundercloud crackled above everyone's head. Patricia Harrington was not in attendance, but two of her closest allies on the board were there, anxious looks etched into their faces. The meeting took place in a glass-walled conference room overlooking the city skyline. Ethan stood at the head of the long table, his expression set with determination. The board members settled around him, their gazes darting nervously, waiting for him to address the rumors that swirled through the press. He began by stating simply, "Some of you may have seen the tabloids." The stale air was punctured by a few uneasy coughs. Keeping his tone steady, Ethan explained the clinic error, how he'd unknowingly become a father to a boy he'd only recently met. He did not share Linda's name or Oliver's age, nor did he mention their recent family outings. He merely told them that legal counsel was managing the situation. "My personal life may be in the spotlight temporarily," he continued, pausing to meet each pair of eyes around the table. "But I won't let it affect Harrington Biogen's operations. We continue to stand firm. If any reporters contact you, direct them to our media relations team. That's all." A woman named Ellen, a veteran board member, raised a delicate question. What if the press ramps up the speculation? The stock price could waver if investors sense scandal. Another man, Cecil, cleared his throat and added, "We need to address potential fallout. Morale might suffer if employees think there's a major crisis brewing." Ethan listened, his jaw tight. "I understand your concerns," he said calmly, "but this is not corporate fraud or malpractice. It's my personal matter, and the only reason it's relevant is because certain tabloids thrive on sensationalizing any unexpected situation." Though they tried pushing for more details, Ethan sidestepped further interrogation. He promised weekly updates on the legal front and closed the meeting without opening the floor for broader discussion. A few members lingered as though hoping for a private chat, but Ethan strode out, resolved not to let them pick apart the intimate details of his new fatherhood. Outside the conference room, Vanessa gave him a sympathetic nod, signaling that she'd been fending off journalists all morning. When he finally returned to his office, he found a message from Linda waiting in his voicemail. She sounded tense, explaining that she'd glimpsed the headlines. A reporter had shown up at her apartment building again, only to be turned away by the security team Ethan had arranged. Linda worried about Oliver. "He's asking if you're famous and why people care about you. I don't want to lie to him, but I don't know how to tell him this is all because of a story that we never chose." Ethan felt a pang of guilt. He couldn't stop the tabloids from prying, but he also couldn't watch passively as Oliver's life was invaded by it. Picking up the phone, he called Linda back. She answered on the second ring, and he could almost hear her anxious heartbeat through the line. "Look," Ethan said gently, "I know this is terrible timing. Let's be honest with Oliver, but keep it simple. He's old enough to sense something's up. You can tell him that people are curious because I run a company, and when reporters think there's something unusual, they pounce. He doesn't have to absorb every detail, just enough to understand that it's not his fault." Linda agreed, though she sounded drained. Oliver had been excited to see Ethan again soon, but she worried that too many public outings would invite further attention. "Maybe we can do something at my place," she suggested. "Keep it low-key." Ethan didn't hesitate. "I'd love that," he said. "Whatever makes Oliver feel safe." The next morning, Ethan arrived at Linda's small apartment building with a bag of groceries in hand. As promised, there were 2 security personnel posted discreetly near the entrance. Neither looked out of place, blending in as though they were mere passers-by, but Ethan knew they would intercept anyone suspicious. He rode the creaky elevator up to the 6th floor, his nerves on high alert. The building was older, with chipped paint in the hallways and a faint aroma of cooking oil. It struck him how far from his world of gleaming floors and sleek decor Linda and Oliver lived, yet it also felt warm, lived in, and free of the sterile gloss that sometimes characterized his own home. Linda opened the door with a weary smile. Her curly hair was pinned back, and she wore casual clothes that showed the stress etched into her features. The tension in her eyes softened when she saw the grocery bag. "You didn't have to do that," she said, ushering him in. "I appreciate it, though. I was planning to whip up something for dinner, but I wasn't sure what you liked." Ethan stepped into the living room, where a modest bookshelf and a small TV took up most of the space. He noticed a few framed pictures of Linda with a young Oliver, photos from birthdays, school events, bits of life he had never been part of. She caught him staring and said, "Those are from different stages. He's grown so fast I can barely believe it." Oliver appeared from a hallway wearing socks that slid a little on the polished floor. "Hi," he greeted shyly. Ethan offered a gentle nod. "Hey, buddy," he replied. "I brought some stuff to cook. Are you hungry?" Oliver shrugged, glancing at Linda as if unsure what he should say. She nudged him gently, and he shuffled forward. "Yeah, I'm kinda hungry," he admitted. They made their way to the kitchen, a narrow space lined with mismatched cabinets. Ethan set the groceries down on the small counter and began pulling out ingredients: pasta, fresh vegetables, chicken breasts, and a jar of sauce. "I'm no gourmet chef," he warned, "but I can handle a decent chicken pasta." Linda laughed a little, the sound tinged with relief. "He's never seen you cook, so we'll see how he reacts," she teased. Oliver hung back, curiosity brightening his face. As Ethan started chopping vegetables, Oliver edged closer, peering at his technique. "Can I help?" the boy asked, sounding hesitant but eager. Ethan handed him a plastic knife suitable for kids and gently guided him in how to cut mushrooms. The quiet cooperation seemed to soothe whatever tension lingered. Linda moved to stir the sauce, glancing occasionally at them. Conversation flowed in soft bursts. Oliver asked why people cared so much about who was in Ethan's family. Ethan paused, choosing his words carefully. "Sometimes when someone runs a big company, people think everything they do is news. They look for secrets, even where there aren't any." Oliver frowned, continuing to slice mushrooms. "That's dumb," he said, matter of fact. "Just because you have money doesn't mean they should bother us." Linda shot Ethan a sympathetic look, and he could only nod. "I agree," he said softly. "But that's how some people make their living, by trying to find stories." Oliver accepted that explanation with a resigned shrug. Once their dinner simmered, Linda set the table with mismatched plates. The three of them gathered in her small dining area, so cramped that their knees bumped if they moved too abruptly, and yet the homminess of it brought a smile to Ethan's face. Between mouthfuls of pasta, Oliver told them about school projects and how his teacher wanted them to do a mini science fair. He mentioned, almost shyly, that he might try something related to genetics, DNA extractions from fruit. Linda raised an eyebrow at that, a mixture of uncertainty and pride, while Ethan's chest filled with a warm glow. "I know a few tips," he said. "We did that in our early training labs. If you want help, I'm your guy." Oliver grinned into his plate, muttering a soft, "Thanks." After dinner, Linda suggested they watch a nature documentary. She pulled up a streaming service, and Oliver selected an episode about coral reefs. Ethan settled on the sofa, feeling the unfamiliar yet comforting sensation of being part of a family routine. Oliver plopped down next to him, a small gap between them. Linda sat on the other side, the three of them forming a neat line on the cushions. As the narrator droned on about symbiotic relationships in the ocean, Ethan felt Oliver's head slowly lean sideways until it rested against his arm. Surprised and touched, he glanced down. The boy's eyes were fixed on the screen, but the weight of his head spoke volumes. Something had changed in these past weeks. A thread of trust was taking hold. Ethan fought the urge to ruffle Oliver's hair, worried it might startle him away. Instead, he let the gentle contact remain, cherishing the moment. After the documentary ended, Oliver yawned. Linda announced that it was close to bedtime, and with only a mild protest, Oliver headed off to brush his teeth. The small hallway light blinked on, and Ethan heard a splash of water as the faucet ran. He turned to Linda, seeing the glimmer of gratitude in her eyes. "Thank you for coming," she whispered. "He's been on edge since those reporters showed up, but tonight really helped." Ethan nodded, feeling the tug of reality. "I'm glad," he replied. "I'll make sure the security remains in place. If there's any sign of more press harassing you, call me right away." Linda paused, her gaze flicking briefly to a photograph of Oliver on the wall. "I will," she said, her voice steady. Then she offered a small, shaky smile that said everything about her relief and lingering fear. Oliver returned, hair damp from a hurried face washing, clutching a stuffed dolphin. He blinked sleepily at Ethan. "Will you come over again?" he asked, half hiding behind the dolphin as he spoke. Ethan's throat constricted, and he nodded without hesitation. "If your mom's okay with it, and you want me to, absolutely," he answered. Oliver considered this, then nodded back. "Cool," he mumbled. A second later, Linda guided him to his room, leaving Ethan standing in the living area. He listened to the soft murmur of their voices down the hall, thinking how foreign yet wonderful it was to be part of a bedtime routine. Eventually, Linda reemerged, closing Oliver's door softly. She walked Ethan to the apartment entrance, and in a moment of impulsive honesty, he reached out to squeeze her hand. "We'll get through this," he assured her, hoping he sounded confident rather than desperate. Linda nodded, eyes turning glossy with emotion, but she kept herself composed. Ethan left quietly, taking the elevator down. Outside, the security detail waited by an inconspicuous sedan. They nodded at him, an unspoken confirmation that the area was clear. As he drove home, the city lights flashed past, each cluster of headlights a reminder that he was part of a bustling world full of restless eyes and hungry cameras. Yet for the first time in his life, protecting another person's well-being outweighed his own worries. He imagined Oliver asleep, the stuffed dolphin clutched close, and he found solace in that mental picture. No matter what the tabloids printed tomorrow, Ethan resolved to be there for Oliver and Linda, come what may. Before going to the next part, please subscribe to our channel, like this story, and share it with friends. Ethan's days took on a surreal rhythm as he juggled the unrelenting stress of tabloid threats with the quiet warmth he found in Oliver's company. Each morning brought fresh headlines speculating on the identity of the rumored secret child, while each evening he checked in with Linda, ensuring she and Oliver remained protected. Though the corporate wheels at Harrington Biogen turned as smoothly as ever, Ethan's mind continually gravitated to the fragile makeshift family he was trying to keep safe. Linda's apartment became a small sanctuary in the storm. Twice more that week, Ethan stopped by, careful to vary his arrival times so no lurking paparazzi could chart a pattern. Linda would greet him with a mixture of relief and apology, always worried she was somehow burdening him. Oliver would bustle around, proudly showing off something new he'd learned at school. One time it was a half-finished paper on constellations, another time a notebook filled with sketches of mechanical inventions that combined a child's imagination with surprising logic. Ethan found himself enthralled by the 9-year-old's creativity, remembering his own lonely childhood when he'd tried to build small contraptions for fun, only to have them disregarded by preoccupied parents. One evening, Oliver and Ethan set out to build a model rocket from a kit. Linda hovered by the table, watching them spread out the pieces. Ethan offered tips on the best adhesives for the fins and how to balance the weight so the rocket wouldn't veer off course. Now and then, Oliver cracked a joke about mission control, imitating the calm voices he'd heard on space documentaries. Despite the tension swirling outside those walls, the air inside the apartment felt almost cozy. They pieced the rocket together over the course of an hour, then let it dry in the corner of the living room. When it was done, Oliver patted the side of the makeshift craft. "Do you think it'll really fly?" he asked eagerly. Ethan nodded. "We'll take it to a proper launch site soon. Maybe one of the city parks has a safe open space. We can try it out together." The boy beamed at the promise. Linda, arms folded beneath her sweater, looked on with equal parts happiness and apprehension. That night, as Ethan prepared to leave, Linda walked him to the apartment door. They paused in the narrow hallway, voices hushed. "Thank you for giving him something positive," she said, eyes flicking toward the rocket. "He's been checking windows and doors lately, afraid someone might sneak up with a camera. But once he starts working on a project with you, he forgets his worries." The sadness in her voice stabbed at Ethan's conscience. Children shouldn't have to fear strangers lurking outside. "It won't be like this forever," he said quietly. "The tabloids will move on to another target soon, and we'll figure out a better routine." Linda nodded, though her expression showed lingering doubt. His mother, Patricia, complicated matters behind the scenes. She summoned him to her penthouse for a family discussion, and he went grudgingly, knowing that refusing her outright would only escalate her meddling. Her home epitomized luxury: polished floors, crystal chandeliers, curated artwork. Ethan had rarely set foot in it since moving out in his early 20s. He stood in her marble foyer, heart pounding, while she greeted him with a brittle smile. "Come to the sitting room," she said, and her staccato heels clicked across the shining floor. The sitting room boasted an ornate fireplace and gilded mirrors. Patricia motioned for him to sit on a velvet couch, then positioned herself in an armchair opposite. She didn't bother with pleasantries. "Ethan, the press has locked onto this child story," she began, her voice crisp. "You cannot simply hide and hope it dissolves. There must be a strategic approach. I've spoken to certain board members, and they believe a concise public statement might quell the rumors." Ethan stared at her, forcibly containing his frustration. "Mother, I'm aware of what the board wants. I'm also aware that a 9-year-old boy doesn't need to see his face plastered on newspapers. My lawyers are devising a plan. Until then, I'm not parading Oliver in front of cameras." Patricia pursed her lips. "You speak as if I suggested using him. I'm only pointing out that your refusal to address the situation invites more speculation. If the tabloids keep digging, they might uncover private details that could embarrass you, the company, and possibly the child. A simple statement acknowledging a paternity circumstance. Stop, Ethan interrupted, sharper than he intended. This isn't just about controlling the narrative. It's about a real person, a boy who barely knows me yet. I'm not making him a spectacle to appease investors. He rose from the couch, longing to escape her stifling presence. I appreciate your concern, but Oliver's well-being is my priority. You or the board can spin that however you want, but that's final. Patricia eyed him with disapproval, but she didn't try to stop him as he walked out. Instead, her voice trailed after him in a warning murmur. Don't let emotions cloud your judgment. You built Harrington Biogen on calculated moves. Don't throw it away. He left without replying, chest tight with anger. In the elevator down, he breathed deeply, determined not to let her words poison his resolve. 3 days passed with no new bombshells, though the tabloids continued running vague articles about the CEO with a rumored love child. Ethan's security team reported that reporters still prowled near Linda's building occasionally, but they hadn't harassed her again. In the privacy of his office, Ethan went through routine tasks and research proposals, all the while anticipating the day he could take Oliver to launch that small model rocket. The child had texted him from Linda's phone, a short, excited note about painting the rocket fins silver. Ethan had responded with encouragement, feeling a surge of gratitude that Oliver reached out at all. Then, on a quiet Friday afternoon, a phone call shattered the fragile peace. Vanessa poked her head in with an urgent expression. "It's the head of security," she whispered. "He says Linda's building super found a strange device outside her door." Ethan's heart lurched. He snatched up the receiver. The security chief explained that someone had installed a hidden camera in the hallway. Linda had called them in a panic, demanding to know what it meant. The building's landlord was furious, threatening to file trespassing charges if they caught the culprit. For a moment, Ethan couldn't speak, fury roaring in his ears. The idea that a journalist had planted a camera to secretly record Linda and Oliver in their own home felt like a disgusting violation. He ended the call, heart thudding, and sank into his chair. This was worse than an intrusive question or a doorstep ambush. This was blatant spying. If reporters felt emboldened enough to cross that line, who knew what else they might do? That evening, Ethan rushed to Linda's place, ignoring any possibility of paparazzi. He found her in the hallway outside her door, arms folded tightly, face pale. Oliver hovered behind her, eyes wide with confusion. Ethan pulled Linda aside, trying to speak calmly so Oliver wouldn't become more frightened. "I'll hire someone to sweep your apartment for bugs," he said. "We'll also see if there are any fingerprints on that camera. Are you two all right?" Linda inhaled shakily. "We're scared," she admitted. "Oliver's old enough to realize that someone's been sneaking around and he's on edge." Ethan gently placed a hand on Oliver's shoulder, leading him inside. The boy looked up. "Why are they doing this?" he asked, voice trembling. "We didn't do anything wrong." Ethan's chest tightened at the raw fear in the child's eyes. He crouched down. "You haven't done anything wrong," he said firmly. "Some people just want a story they can sell. They don't care who they hurt, but we won't let them hurt you." They sat together in the small living room. The curtains were drawn, the lights dimmed. Oliver pressed himself against Linda's side, hugging a cushion. Ethan spoke quietly about the extra precautions he would take, around-the-clock monitoring, more frequent sweeps of the hallway. "In the meantime," he added softly, "would you both feel safer staying somewhere else for a while? Maybe I can arrange a temporary apartment with better security." Linda hesitated, biting her lip. "I don't want to uproot Oliver again," she whispered. He hates change, and this is his home, but I also don't want to ignore the risk. Ethan nodded, understanding the dilemma. Think about it, he replied. I can set it up in a day if you decide to go that route. No matter what, I'll keep the security detail here. Turning to Oliver, he tried a gentle smile. We'll still launch that rocket soon, okay? Oliver gave a tentative nod, his voice subdued. Okay. He paused, swallowing. But what if they follow us there? The question pierced Ethan's heart. No 9-year-old should have to worry about being followed. We'll pick a spot where we're safe, Ethan promised. Nobody will ruin our day. Linda offered to make tea, but her hands were shaking so badly Ethan quietly took over. He filled a kettle, rummaged for tea bags, and tried to keep the conversation on mild topics, anything to distract Oliver from the idea that their hallway had been rigged with a hidden camera. At one point, Oliver asked about rocket fuel mixtures, an obvious bid to steer the talk towards something he loved. Ethan played along, describing common model rocket propellants, ignoring how Linda blinked rapidly, as if holding back tears of frustration. Before leaving, Ethan made Linda swear she'd call if anything else suspicious happened. He gave Oliver a gentle pat on the shoulder, longing to offer more tangible reassurance. The child looked up, eyes filled with worry. For a moment, Ethan wanted to sweep them both out of this cramped apartment, pack them into his car, and drive somewhere safe and private. But Linda's pride and Oliver's sense of home stood in the way. So he left them behind protective locks and security guards, hating the powerless feeling that followed him into the night. In the elevator, he texted Morgan, his lawyer, demanding she file any legal action possible against the unknown perpetrator. He also messaged the crisis consultant, instructing them to speed up planning for a public statement. Maybe if Ethan openly acknowledged Oliver, the tabloids would lose the thrill of a hidden secret. Perhaps then, they'd retreat. But as he stepped outside into the cooler evening air, he wondered if shining a spotlight on Oliver would only feed the vultures. He drove home in silence, ignoring the chatter on the radio. Inside his penthouse, the city skyline looked particularly hollow. Instead of finding comfort in the gleaming towers, Ethan felt weary and alone, missing the ordinary warmth of Linda's small living room. He checked his phone before bed, half hoping for a message saying they were all right, that no intruder had returned. None arrived. Slipping into uneasy sleep, Ethan clung to the single truth that guided him now. He'd do anything to ensure Oliver felt safe, even if it meant fighting every camera and microphone in the city. Before going to the next part, please subscribe to our channel, like this story, and share it with friends. At dawn, Ethan woke with a pounding headache. The previous night's tension still clung to him, and the emptiness of his penthouse felt oppressive. He staggered to the kitchen, made a pot of coffee, and sipped it while staring at the silent city below. Linda and Oliver had likely just begun their morning routine, Linda rushing to get Oliver ready for school, Oliver yawning his way through breakfast. A camera in the hallway, he thought grimly, still furious at the violation. He opened his phone, scanning the notifications for any sign of further trouble. There were none, but the absence didn't calm him. Soon he dressed and headed to Harrington Biogen, determined to push back against whoever had crossed the line into covert surveillance. The moment he arrived, Morgan Black called, instructing him to come to the legal department's conference room. He found her there, along with 2 paralegals and a security representative. They showed him a photograph of the device found outside Linda's door, a small, camouflaged camera with wireless capabilities. The brand was common, nothing that pointed to a single culprit. Morgan explained that they'd filed an initial complaint with local authorities. If it's a journalist behind this, she said, tapping her pen on the table, they may claim it's some twisted form of free press, but this is illegal trespassing. We should push for an investigation. Ethan was all for it. "If we catch who planted it," he replied, "I want them prosecuted. Let's make an example, so no other reporter thinks they can intimidate a child." His anger simmered, but he tried to keep it controlled, remembering that Oliver and Linda deserved a calm protector, not a raging hothead. Morgan nodded, agreeing that a firm response might deter further intrusions. The security representative added that they were scanning hours of footage from the building's cameras, hoping to identify the person who entered Linda's floor at odd times. After the meeting, Ethan locked himself in his office, ignoring the swirl of corporate responsibilities. He needed to decide if he should finally release a public statement confirming Oliver's existence. Perhaps that candor would deflate the tabloid's urgency to unearth a secret. But another voice in his head warned that once he confirmed Oliver's identity, the child would lose every last scrap of privacy. He might face harassment at school, cameras outside the classroom. Was he truly better off? At lunchtime, Vanessa quietly set a sandwich on Ethan's desk, concern in her eyes. He gave her a grateful nod, admitting that he'd forgotten to eat. She mentioned that calls from the press had slowed, replaced by a new rumor about some Hollywood starlet. "Maybe they're moving on," she suggested hopefully. Ethan's lips twitched in a humorless smile. "I'll believe that when I see it," he said. Still, the possibility gave him a sliver of hope that the crisis might diminish on its own. That afternoon, he took a chance and texted Linda to see if Oliver was free on Saturday to launch the rocket. She replied that Oliver had been eager to go, but he still seemed nervous about being watched. Ethan promised to find a secluded spot, one of those large open fields in the city's outskirts where they could set up and avoid prying eyes. Linda agreed, sounding tentatively optimistic. If they kept the location private and used Ethan's security detail, they might manage a normal outing. 2 days passed without incident. Then Saturday dawned warm and bright, perfect for a rocket launch. Ethan picked up Linda and Oliver in an unmarked SUV with tinted windows to discourage curious onlookers. Oliver clutched the model rocket in both hands, the silver fins glinting in the morning sun. As Ethan drove, Linda sat beside him, occasionally glancing back to check on Oliver's mood. The boy remained quiet but alert, watching the traffic roll by. Ethan tried to keep the conversation light, describing the field they'd be visiting and how they'd stake out a safe distance for the launch. They arrived at a fenced-off portion of a large municipal park that Ethan's security team had secured for the morning. An expanse of grass stretched out under a clear sky, with only a couple of discreet guards lingering at a distance. Oliver stepped out, eyes widening at the open space. He clutched the rocket, scanning the perimeter as if half expecting a camera to pop out of the bushes. When nothing happened, he relaxed, letting a smile tug at his mouth. Linda set up a folding chair, while Ethan guided Oliver through the rocket launching process. They positioned the rocket on a small stand, carefully attaching an igniter. Linda watched from a safe distance, shading her eyes. Oliver's excitement built as they counted down. When Ethan reached one, Oliver pressed the button. With a hiss and a streak of smoke, the rocket shot into the air, climbing until it vanished against the brilliant sky. Oliver let out a thrilled yell, eyes bright. Linda applauded, the tension on her face dissolving into genuine joy. The rocket fell back to Earth with the help of a small parachute, drifting to the far side of the field. Oliver raced off, chasing it down. Ethan jogged after him, hearing the boys' laughter ring across the grass. When they retrieved the rocket, Oliver clutched it triumphantly, exclaiming that they had to do it again. Ethan, panting and grinning, agreed. The second launch was as successful as the first, sending Oliver into another burst of celebratory cheers. Afterward, they spread a picnic blanket in a shady spot near the perimeter fence. Linda unpacked sandwiches and fruit, while Oliver recounted each stage of the flight as though they'd just sent a real satellite into orbit. Ethan felt a wash of contentment. For once, the day felt normal, almost like any father taking his child for a weekend adventure. No paparazzi, no suspicious cameras. Linda seemed relieved, a soft smile lingering on her lips. She even teased Ethan about how he'd shouted encouragement louder than Oliver did, but the peace broke when a guard hurried over, face grim. He leaned down and whispered something that made Ethan's blood run cold. Apparently, a van had parked near the gate and someone was using a long-lens camera to snap photos. The guard had confronted them, but the individual claimed it was a public area. Ethan felt his jaw clench. He glanced at Linda, then Oliver, uncertain whether to alert them. Before he could decide, a shout came from the distance. Another guard was pointing, and Ethan saw the glint of sunlight on camera equipment. Linda's face fell, and Oliver, noticing the adult's tension, looked up with alarm. Ethan stood, telling Linda softly, "Stay here with Oliver. I'll handle it." Linda nodded, her expression torn between fear and frustration. Ethan strode across the grass, the guard at his side. Sure enough, a figure in a baseball cap was clicking away with a telephoto lens. Ethan approached, summoning his most commanding tone. "You need to leave," he ordered, voice ice cold. "This is private property right now. I have a permit." The photographer tried to argue that it was public land, but Ethan's guard brandished documents proving they'd rented the field for an event. Security threatened to call the police for harassment. Under Ethan's glare, the photographer finally retreated, snapping a few final shots before jumping into the van. With a squeal of tires, they sped off, leaving Ethan's nerves jangling. He stared after them, hands balled into fists, willing himself to stay calm. Returning to Linda and Oliver, he saw how rattled they looked. Oliver's shoulders hunched and Linda's eyes brimmed with concern. "They're gone," Ethan said quietly, sinking onto the blanket. "I'm sorry. I thought we'd be safe out here." Oliver didn't respond. He fiddled with the rocket's fins, expression clouded. "I hate them," he mumbled at last. Linda rubbed his back, glancing anxiously at Ethan. Neither of them knew how to shield the boy any better than they already had. Despite the unpleasant interruption, they decided to launch the rocket once more, hoping to end on a positive note. Oliver managed a small grin when the rocket soared into the air one final time, but Ethan could sense the boy's excitement had dimmed. On the drive back, Oliver stared out the window, hugging the model rocket protectively. Linda leaned her head against the seat, whispering to Ethan, "This is exhausting." He nodded, his heart twisting. He felt the weight of responsibility not only for his own actions but for an entire media circus he'd never invited. When they pulled up to Linda's building, security escorted them inside, verifying that no cameras lurked in the lobby. Oliver trudged upstairs, the rocket in hand. Before entering their apartment, he paused. "Do you think they got pictures of me?" he asked quietly. Ethan crouched beside him, feeling helpless. "They might have," he admitted, "but we'll do our best to stop them from printing anything, okay?" Oliver nodded, swallowing. Linda squeezed Ethan's arm, murmured a soft thanks, and led Oliver inside. She shut the door gently, leaving Ethan alone in the hallway with the security detail. The building felt subdued, like a fortress under siege. He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. He could almost feel the tabloid's breath on his neck, hungry for any new drama. That night, back at his penthouse, Ethan paced the living room, ignoring Patricia's latest voicemail. She wanted him to schedule a press conference. He wanted no part in staging a spectacle. Instead, he convened a call with Morgan and the crisis consultant, floating the idea of a single carefully worded interview. They debated the pros and cons. A controlled interview might remove the allure of scandal, but it would also confirm Oliver's identity. The consultant believed that if Ethan described the clinic error and asked for privacy, many outlets might back off. Ethan wrestled with conflicting instincts. Part of him preferred to remain silent, hoping the gossip would fade, but he also recognized that Oliver couldn't live in fear of secret snapshots. By the call's end, he asked for a draft statement, something he could tweak. He didn't commit to releasing it, but at least he'd have an option. He tried to sleep, though restless thoughts wouldn't let him. Whenever he closed his eyes, he pictured Oliver's disappointed expression as the rocket soared overhead, overshadowed by a lurking camera lens. This was supposed to be a memory of triumphant childhood fun, not overshadowed by invasive strangers. Eventually, he dragged himself to the window, gazing at the sparkling city. Through the glass, life continued, unaware of one small boy losing his sense of security. Ethan vowed silently that if the media's thirst for a story wouldn't subside, he'd stand up for Oliver openly and decisively, even if that meant exposing his private life in the process. Before going to the next part, please subscribe to our channel, like this story, and share it with friends. Ethan spent the next few days in a constant state of watchfulness, as if he were traversing a minefield. He coordinated daily with Morgan and her legal team, scanning for any sign that the tabloids were inching closer to identifying Oliver by name. Meanwhile, Patricia continued to prod him for a decisive statement, cautioning that the board was growing wary of unresolved drama. He neither argued with her nor conceded, preferring to keep his head down and shield Linda and Oliver from further intrusions. The sense of urgency within him intensified every time he remembered Oliver's question, "Do you think they got pictures of me?" On Tuesday morning, Ethan's assistant, Vanessa, knocked hesitantly on his office door. She handed him a thick envelope. "This arrived by courier," she explained, looking uneasy. "No return address, and the courier didn't say who sent it." With a nod of thanks, Ethan opened it after she left. Inside, he found several grainy photographs, images of Linda walking down the street with Oliver, pictures of Ethan arriving at her building at night, and even a blurry shot of the rocket launch. An unsigned note accompanied them, scribbled on plain paper. "We have more. Public statement or private arrangement." Ethan felt a rush of anger, tempered by dread. This was blackmail, a threat to escalate the story unless he somehow complied. He carefully placed the photographs back into the envelope, locking them in his desk drawer. Then he called Morgan. She arrived within minutes, scanning the note and photos, face set in grim lines. "They want you to negotiate," she said, frowning. "Probably hoping you'll offer money or exclusive access. It's disgusting, but not surprising." Ethan exhaled shakily, his mind returning to Oliver's anxious expression. "Let's move forward with that interview plan," he decided, voice subdued. "If I make a controlled statement, these pictures lose their shock value. Then maybe they won't have the leverage they want." Morgan agreed to set it up quickly with a reputable news outlet, one known for more balanced reporting than sensational gossip. The plan was for Ethan to give a single, carefully managed interview explaining the circumstances of Oliver's birth. He would emphasize that the child had never been a secret by design. Rather, Ethan had only recently learned of him. Morgan believed this approach, combined with a plea for privacy, might extinguish the tabloid feeding frenzy. If it didn't, at least they would have a public record of Ethan's stance, making blackmail attempts less profitable. That evening, Ethan wrestled with guilt as he called Linda to inform her of his decision. She took a long moment to answer, then quietly asked, "What if the publicity gets worse? Won't putting Oliver's story out there invite more curiosity?" Ethan admitted that he could not guarantee peaceful aftermath. Yet he also explained that the blackmail photos showed the extent to which prying eyes were already fixated on Oliver. "It might be safer to remove the mystery," he said. "Once people see a straightforward explanation, some of them will lose interest." Linda's voice trembled. "I'll support whatever you think is best," she said. "Just don't let them corner Oliver into some cameras flashing scenario." The interview was arranged for Friday morning with a respected anchor named Lorraine Barrett. She had a reputation for fairness and a willingness to keep family matters private when asked. Ethan chose the venue, his office at Harrington Biogen, ensuring a controlled environment. Morgan coached him for hours on how to phrase each answer, how to maintain composure, and how to refuse invasive questions about Oliver's day-to-day life. The eve of the interview, Ethan hardly slept. He kept seeing images of Oliver's uncertain face, worried that the boy might stumble across the broadcast and think Ethan was exploiting him. Friday arrived, crisp with early sunlight shimmering across the glass exterior of Harrington Biogen. Ethan dressed in a dark gray suit, deliberately less flashy than his usual, wanting to convey sincerity and calm. By 8 o'clock, Lorraine Barrett and a small camera crew had arrived, setting up in a reserved conference room on the top floor. Morgan hovered near the entrance, double-checking vantage points to prevent any unscrupulous staffer from filming behind the scenes. At precisely 9, Lorraine and Ethan settled into chairs facing each other. She offered a polite handshake, then waited for the camera operator's countdown. Once rolling, Lorraine opened with a broad question about Harrington Biogen's mission and Ethan's role as a founder. He answered smoothly, grateful for a moment to establish context. But soon she pivoted to the rumors. Ethan inhaled, his chest tight. With measured words, he explained that through a DNA testing mishap at a clinic, a child had been born, unbeknownst to him, several years ago. He emphasized that he'd only recently discovered the truth, and that he was doing everything in his power to give the boy a stable environment. Lorraine's gaze remained neutral, kind but precise as she pressed for clarification. "So you confirm you have a biological son you only met this year?" she asked softly. "Yes," Ethan replied, voice carefully level. "He's 9. He's bright, curious, and none of this is his fault. I hope people can respect his privacy." Lorraine nodded, acknowledging the delicate nature of the topic. She gently probed about the mother and the clinic's error. Ethan kept details minimal, explaining only that the mother had chosen donor fertility, never suspecting it would involve his sample. "We're cooperating to provide a good life for him," he said. "That's all that truly matters." Lorraine then asked why he hadn't addressed the rumors sooner. Ethan exhaled, glancing briefly at the camera lens. "Because my priority was never publicity. When I learned I had a son, I had to earn his trust. A tabloid spotlight doesn't help a child process something so personal. But the rumors have escalated, and I felt it necessary to give a single, honest account." His voice wavered slightly on the last words, remembering Oliver's face. They wrapped up in about 20 minutes. Lorraine thanked him for his candor, promising to air the segment in a balanced format. After the crew left, Ethan collapsed into his chair, adrenaline draining away. Morgan approached, quietly praising him for maintaining composure. "You did well," she said. "It was brief, but enough to take the wind out of the tabloid sails." Ethan nodded, though inside he felt hollow. He'd just placed Oliver's story on public record, hoping it would disarm blackmailers. Now he could only wait, bracing for the public response. Linda watched the interview that evening with Oliver, having decided that he should hear the explanation directly, not secondhand from classmates or internet chatter. She texted Ethan afterward. "Oliver wants to talk to you. He's okay, but has questions. Could you come by tomorrow?" The next morning, Ethan stood at Linda's door, heart racing. She welcomed him in, stepping aside to reveal Oliver curled up on the couch. The boy wore sweatpants and a hoodie, face serious. He held a remote control in his hands as though he'd paused the broadcast and was studying it. Ethan sat beside him, clasping his own hands in his lap. "Hey," he said gently. Oliver looked up, eyes flicking over Ethan's face as though searching for answers. "You said I'm bright and curious," Oliver murmured. "On TV." Ethan nodded, swallowing a lump in his throat. "I meant every word. You are bright and curious And he paused, forcing an even tone. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way." Oliver drew in a breath. "Mom said you were trying to make it so people wouldn't chase me around anymore." His voice was small, edged with lingering confusion. "Is that really gonna work?" Ethan laid a hand on the couch cushion, close enough for Oliver to see but not forcing contact. "I hope so," he said, voice earnest. "Sometimes when the truth is out, the excitement dies down. People move on, but if they don't, I promise I won't let them hurt you." Something in Oliver's posture softened. The boy leaned his shoulder against Ethan's arm, not quite hugging him but allowing closeness. "I just want it to stop," he whispered. "I can't sleep sometimes thinking people are outside with cameras." Ethan felt a surge of anger at the paparazzi, but kept his voice calm. "I know, buddy," he said. "We're trying to make it stop." Linda, lingering near the window, gave Ethan a grateful look. They spent the rest of the morning talking in quiet voices, playing a board game that Oliver spread on the coffee table. It felt subdued compared to the rocket launches and museum visits, but it was soothing in its normalcy. Ethan found solace in each small sign of acceptance from Oliver, the way he asked Ethan to roll the dice for him once, or how he recounted a silly joke from school. Linda joined in occasionally, smiling at their easy banter. For a few hours, the specter of cameras and rumors faded from view. However, around noon, Vanessa texted Ethan an urgent link. The official broadcast of his interview had just gone live on the network's website. Within minutes, smaller outlets started quoting it. Reactions online ranged from supportive to cynical, with some praising Ethan's honesty and others calling the interview a damage control stunt. Ethan sighed, handing his phone to Linda to show her the coverage. She grimaced at a headline that read, "Billionaire admits secret son, the truth at last." Oliver noticed their concern, glancing up from the board game. "Are they being mean again?" he asked. Linda smoothed his hair, forcing a smile. "Not exactly. People always have opinions, honey. The important part is that we're all okay." Ethan nodded in agreement. "Nothing's changed between us," he added, meeting Oliver's gaze. "I'm still the same person you launched a rocket with last week." The boy's eyes flickered with relief. "Good," he said simply, then returned to fiddling with the game pieces. Outside, the city might be buzzing with chatter, but inside Linda's apartment, they clung to normalcy. After a while, Linda suggested they order lunch, an easy gesture that let them keep talking and playing until mid-afternoon. By the time Ethan left, Oliver seemed calmer, if still a bit wary. On his drive home, Ethan mulled over the next steps. The interview was public, so the tabloids had no exclusive angle anymore. The blackmail threat might lose steam, but it could also escalate into more intrusive stunts. He resolved to keep Linda and Oliver's security tight, no matter the cost. If someone dared to come near them again, they would find themselves face to face with lawyers and law enforcement. As evening settled in, Ethan paced his penthouse, checking social media and news updates. He braced for negativity, but was surprised to see some sympathetic voices. A few posts urged tabloids to leave the child alone, calling out unethical reporting. Perhaps an ember of decency existed in the public sphere after all. Yet Ethan knew how fickle public opinion could be. For now, he allowed himself a brief moment of relief. The statement was done. Oliver hadn't run from him in anger or confusion. If tomorrow brought more chaos, at least they would face it having taken a stand. With that thought, he allowed himself a cautious hope that they might finally be turning a corner, ready to forge a real future together. Before going to the next part, please subscribe to our channel, like this story, and share it with friends. Ethan had tried to steel himself for whatever fallout might come after the public interview, but he could never have predicted just how quickly the media storm would shift. Over the weekend, Gossip outlets spent hours dissecting Ethan's statements and analyzing every frame of his on-camera posture. But much to everyone's surprise, a bigger scandal surfaced in the celebrity world. A series of leaked recordings involving two famous actors. The public's attention pivoted abruptly away from Ethan's story, leaving only a handful of respectable columnists offering measured takes on the CEO who had inadvertently discovered he was a father. It was as if a sudden gust of wind had blown the spotlight elsewhere, granting Ethan and Oliver a small pocket of privacy that felt almost miraculous. Linda called Ethan on Sunday evening, her voice brighter than he had heard in weeks. It seemed that reporters were no longer loitering outside her building, and there had been no further sign of hidden devices. "Oliver told me he slept through the night without checking the windows," she said happily. "He's still cautious, but he's not afraid to open the door anymore." Ethan felt a surge of relief, grateful for even this modest sense of calm. Though he knew the tabloids could circle back at any time, he hoped the biggest wave of chaos had passed. The next week, Oliver finished his school science fair project. Linda invited Ethan to attend the event, which was set up in the school's modest gymnasium. Initially, Oliver worried about whether any reporters might appear, but Linda assured him that security would stay discreetly in the background. On the day of the fair, Ethan arrived early, weaving through rows of trifold posters depicting chemistry experiments, volcano models, and robotics demonstrations. He found Oliver's display near the far wall, where the boy had set out a small station for extracting DNA from strawberries. Oliver noticed Ethan the moment he entered, grinned shyly, then continued explaining the process to a curious parent who had stopped by. After a few minutes, Ethan walked up to the table, offering a proud smile. Oliver beamed and launched into his spiel, showing Ethan the steps involved in breaking down the fruit's cell walls using dish soap and salt solution. The boy had meticulously labeled every container and included short write-ups about what each reagent did. Ethan felt a lump in his throat, marveling at just how much Oliver had absorbed in so little time. Linda stood off to the side, snapping a few photos on her phone. When Oliver finished, Ethan clapped lightly, leaning in to examine the thin white strands of DNA that the boy had managed to isolate in a small test tube. "It's incredible," Ethan murmured. "You really understand this." Oliver shrugged, cheeks coloring with pride. "I learned a lot from reading books at home," he said. Then, with a sly grin, he added, "and from my friend who runs a biotech company." Ethan laughed softly, ruffling Oliver's hair for the first time. The boy didn't flinch away, he just smiled bigger, as though relishing that small, fatherly gesture. Many of Oliver's classmates were too busy showing off their own projects to pay much attention to Ethan, which was exactly what Ethan had hoped. Linda lingered near them, greeting the occasional teacher or parent who recognized her. After Oliver's demonstration wrapped up, a small group of kids invited him over to see a homemade robot shaped like a dinosaur. Oliver shot a questioning glance at Ethan, who nodded encouragingly. With an excited wave, the boy hurried off to join his peers, leaving Ethan and Linda alone for a moment. They stood in companionable silence, the hum of children's chatter echoing around them. Linda folded her arms, watching Oliver animatedly discuss circuit boards with the other kids. "He looks happier," she remarked quietly. "A month ago, he was afraid to even walk home from school. Now he's smiling like nothing happened." Ethan felt a pang of gratitude for the relative peace that had settled over their lives. "I want it to stay that way," he said. "I know we can't control everything, but if there's any chance we can maintain some normalcy, I'll do whatever it takes." When the science fair ended, Oliver accepted a small ribbon for his project, proclaiming him winner of the most innovative use of household items. He seemed utterly delighted by the recognition. Linda took more pictures, capturing Oliver's triumphant grin and Ethan's quiet pride. Then they gathered up the supplies and test tubes, loading them into Linda's car. She invited Ethan to join them for an early dinner at a nearby burger place. Oliver chimed in eagerly, so Ethan readily agreed. While they ate, Oliver peppered Ethan with questions about real-world biotech labs, wanting to know if the same principles applied to more advanced work. Ethan answered each query with patience, describing gene editing, protein engineering, and the importance of rigorous testing. The conversation meandered into talk of everyday things, from Oliver's favorite TV shows to Linda's plan to redecorate their apartment. There was an air of reassurance to it all, a sense that they had stepped across a threshold, emerging from crisis and into something that felt more like a genuine family bond. Sensing a lull in the conversation, Linda cleared her throat. "So, about the future," she said. Her voice was careful, but there was a certain resolve in her eyes. "Oliver keeps asking if there's a chance we might do more together. Not just weekends, but maybe you could come to some of his school events, or we could plan a short trip even. I don't want to burden you, but..." He's excited. Ethan set down his burger, heart twinging at the question. "I'm open to anything that helps us be in each other's lives," he replied gently. "I missed 9 years. I don't want to miss any more." Oliver glanced up, eyebrows raised. "Really? You'd come see me play soccer at recess if they let parents watch?" Ethan laughed, then nodded. "I'll even cheer from the sidelines," he joked, imagining the bizarre sight of a CEO in a business suit standing by an elementary school soccer field. Still, the notion felt oddly exhilarating. Linda's face softened, relief emanating from her. "That means a lot," she whispered. "We can work out the specifics together." After dinner, they said their goodbyes in the parking lot. Oliver gave Ethan a spontaneous hug, quick and shy, but heartfelt. Ethan knelt a bit, returning the hug with a hand gently pressed to the back of Oliver's head. A warmth spread through him that no business triumph had ever matched. Then Oliver hopped into the car, yammering about how the robot dinosaur coughed up marbles. Linda lingered a moment, her expression a mixture of gratitude and something else, perhaps lingering disbelief at how far they had come. "Thank you," she said simply, stepping closer. "For everything." Ethan inclined his head, murmuring, "No, thank you, for trusting me enough to let me in." In the days that followed, Morgan informed Ethan that the attempt at blackmail had largely fizzled since the official interview had stolen the tabloid's thunder. A few stray gossip sites ran half-hearted follow-ups, but the public appetite for a secret child story was all but gone. Patricia, to Ethan's relief, ceased her haranguing about crisis management. Even the board members seemed calmer, with quarterly figures looking strong and no further media uproar to distract investors. Ethan felt the weight on his chest lift, replaced by a gentle sense of possibility he couldn't recall feeling since he was a boy himself. One late afternoon, Ethan received a short text from Oliver. "Can I see your office again? I want to ask about those machines Dr. Wong had." Ethan smiled, texting back that he'd arrange a day for Oliver to visit the lab once more. Then another thought came to him. Maybe he could set up a small internship or a science camp for kids like Oliver. He typed out the idea in a note, feeling a spark of excitement. For years he'd donated to educational charities, but he'd never had a personal connection to the children on the receiving end. Now, with Oliver as inspiration, he saw an opportunity to shape Harrington Biogen's outreach in a real, meaningful way. That night, he didn't go home to an empty penthouse. Instead, he drove back to Linda's apartment, having been invited for a casual dinner again. The memory of hush money or PR spin felt distant, replaced by the simple pleasure of stepping off a rickety elevator to find Oliver peeking through a cracked door, waving him inside. They cooked spaghetti together, joking about who was the better sauce stirrer. When they finally sat down to eat, Oliver insisted on practicing a short presentation about the next round of science fair ideas he had in mind. Ethan listened, enraptured, and Linda poured wine for the two adults. The sense of closeness in the small dining area enveloped him like a warm blanket after a chilling storm. Later, after Oliver had gone to bed, Linda and Ethan lingered in the living room, mugs of tea in hand. She admitted she sometimes feared another wave of paparazzi, another quiet hallway camera. Ethan confessed the same worry, but promised he would remain vigilant. "We can't predict the future," he told her softly, "but at least we know we won't handle it alone." And so, for the first time in his life, Ethan Harrington believed that a future existed beyond the walls of his office and the pages of a business journal. A future that included a curious, inventive child who shared his DNA, and a woman strong enough to raise that child alone, until chance and technology revealed the connection that would bring them all together. As midnight approached, Ethan gathered his coat, preparing to leave. Linda followed him to the door, the hush of the hallway comforting rather than ominous. Oliver was sound asleep, and the city outside felt peaceful, as if acknowledging their new beginning. She offered him a gentle smile. "Good night, Ethan," she said, "and thank you." He squeezed her hand, feeling an unfamiliar tenderness bloom in his chest. "Good night," he replied, stepping out with a final glance at the door behind him, the door that now held a piece of his heart. As he left the building, he sent one last message to his lawyer, telling her to stand down unless the tabloids reappeared. For once, the storm had passed, and in its wake, Ethan looked forward to building a life where fatherhood, friendship, and real connections mattered more than any headline could ever convey.